equal. But you look at me and you look at Small Joe, and you can see that statement is not true.
When you think of Scott Steiner, it's almost impossible not to think of his Bad Mass promo, the one where the numbers made no sense, but he delivered it with so much confidence, you almost believed him. It was chaotic, hilarious, and somehow became one of the most iconic moments in wrestling. Funny thing is, out of all his matches and wild antics, it was that nonsense math rant that blew up. Just goes to show, sometimes it's the most unexpected stuff that makes you famous. Scott Steiner might be best known for his Bad Mass, that legendary 2008 promo in TNA, where he completely butchered statistics while talking about his chances of winning a match. It made no sense at all, but the way he said it with full confidence turned it into an instant classic. That wild moment became known as Steiner Math, and it's been parodied ever since. It perfectly captured just how unpredictable and over-the-top Steiner's character really was. But if you think that math meltdown is the only reason he's been in the spotlight, you're in for a ride. Because Steiner's name has popped up a lot, and not just for promos and matches. After his time in TNA, things got heated, literally during a WrestleMania weekend. Scott reportedly confronted Hulk Hogan's then-wife Jennifer at an airport, claiming he had some things to get off his chest about Hogan's backstage behavior in TNA. That encounter led to Hogan allegedly calling the cops, accusing Steiner of assault and threats, which actually got Steiner banned from the WWE Hall of Fame ceremony in 2015. Yeah, that's intense, and it only gets crazier. On a podcast, Scott once casually admitted that he and his brother Rick bullied a referee in WCW, supposedly as a prank, but also because they were trying to get fired for financial reasons. That prank? Just wait, because Eric Bischoff shared his own story from his first day in WCW, where he saw the Steiner brothers duct taping a referee naked and shoving a pencil where the sun doesn't shine, all in the name of Steiner retribution. Nobody even knows what the poor guy did to deserve it. Then there's the time he allegedly refused a drug test during his WWE return in the early 2000s, unless Triple H took one too. Apparently after that challenge, WWE just never asked again. Classic Steiner move. And of course, no Scott Steiner story is complete without some truly out there comments. In a 2017 media call, he took aim at Stephanie McMahon and Triple H, criticizing how they were running WWE. But he didn't stop there. He even brought up the long-whispered rumor about a supposed relationship between a young Stephanie and Macho Man Randy Savage. Steiner joked that if WWE ever made a statue of Savage, it'd probably end up in Stephanie's bedroom. And just when you think that's the end of the madness, there's the Ring Ka King incident. While working for the Indian wrestling promotion, Steiner played the villain like he always did, but the local crowd, unfamiliar with the scripted nature of wrestling, thought it was real. His antics caused such panic that it turned into a near riot, with people in the audience running for the exits like chaos had broken out. At this point, you can't help but wonder how Scott Steiner managed to have such a solid career with all the chaos constantly following him. But believe it or not, he's actually been successful right from the start of his career. His journey kicked off in the mid-'80s when he trained under Dr. Jerry Graham Jr. in the Sheik at Torio's Health Club in Toledo, Ohio. He stepped into the ring in 1986 with the World Wrestling Association and wasted no time making an impact. Just a couple of months into his career, he beat the Great Wojo to win the WWA World Heavyweight Championship. Not bad for a rookie. He eventually dropped the title in 1987, but by then, he was already turning heads. Scott then teamed up with his trainer, Jerry Graham, and the duo won the WWA Tag Team titles later that year. It was clear from the beginning, Scott had something special, whether solo or in a team. In 1988, he joined the Continental Wrestling Association in Memphis and quickly picked up more tag gold, this time with Billy Joe Travis. After a few title wins and losses, Scott teamed up with Jed Grundy for one last run before parting ways with the promotion in early 1989. That same year, Scott Steiner debuted in World Championship Wrestling. At first, he was just backing up his brother Rick, but it didn't take long for the two to become one of the most explosive tag teams in wrestling. The Steiner brothers quickly made their mark, even bringing their pet pit bull Arnold to the ring. They feuded with Kevin Sullivan, Mike Rotunda, and Doom, all while managed by Missy Hyatt. One of the early highlights came in late 1989 when they won the NWA World Tag Team titles by defeating the Fabulous Freebirds. Their popularity skyrocketed. The Steiners weren't just dominant in the US, they became international stars too. In 1991, after winning both the WCW World Tag Team and IWGP Tag Team Championships, they were dubbed Triple Crown Champions. Around this time, Scott also started branching out into singles competition and even defeated Ric Flair, Arn Anderson, and Bobby Eaton in a special gauntlet series, earning a cool $10,000 in major respect. In 1992, Scott captured the WCW World Television Championship, but vacated it soon after when he and Ric left WCW due to contract disputes. That led them to WWE, where they nearly shook up the entire landscape. WWE officials were high on Scott and even pitched the idea of him winning the 1993 Royal Rumble and becoming world champ at WrestleMania 9. But both brothers were committed to sticking together as a team. Their WWE run saw big matches and title wins, including a back-and-forth feud with Money Inc. and a standout match at SummerSlam '93 in their home state of Michigan. But by early 1994, after a controversial loss to the Quebecers, the Steiners quietly exited WWE. From there, they headed back to Japan, wrestling full-time through 1995. After dominating Japan and making noise around the wrestling world, the Steiner brothers took their talents to a new battlefield, Extreme Championship Wrestling. On July 28, 1995, they showed up in ECW at the Orange County Fairgrounds in Middletown, New York, and made a statement right away by defeating Devon Dudley and Vampire Warrior. Ric had already been making solo appearances there since April, but now with Scott by his side, the full force of the Steiner brothers was unleashed. The next few weeks were packed. On August 4th, they beat Devon again, this time teaming with Too Cold Scorpio and Jim Thorpe in Pennsylvania. A night later, they had their big ECW arena debut at WrestlePalooza, teaming with Eddie Guerrero in a chaotic match against Scorpio, Dean Malenko, and Cactus Jack. Even in defeat, the Steiners looked like absolute killers. They bounced back fast, defeating Scorpio and Malenko, then Scorpio and Chris Benoit in back-to-back nights. They kept bulldozing teams across Pennsylvania, even knocking off the Dudleys again in Kennett Square. But ECW was wild and unpredictable, and at Gangsta's Paradise on September 16th, they teamed with Taz and took a tough loss to the Eliminators and Jason. Still, the Steiners weren't going anywhere quietly. A week later, they beat Raven and Stevie Richards in Middletown, and by the end of October, Scott made his final ECW appearance, teaming with Taz again in a hard-hitting loss to the Eliminators. In March 1996, the brothers returned home, back to WCW. They jumped right into the tag team scene, winning the titles from Harlem Heat in July, only to lose them 3 days later. The stakes kept rising with the arrival of the NWO. The Outsiders stole the spotlight, and the Steiners went to war with them. They actually beat Hall and Nash at Sold Out in January 1997, but Eric Bischoff stripped them of the belts in classic NWO fashion. Still, the Steiners kept chasing gold, and in October, they finally won the titles again, this time beating Hall in 6, with Nash out injured. But then everything changed. Scott Steiner began to look different, bigger, more intense, and unpredictable. By early 1998, he was growing distant from Ric. He'd start matches without tagging him in, or worse, just leave him hanging. Then at Super Brawl 8, the hammer dropped. Scott betrayed his brother mid-match and handed the belts to the Outsiders, joining the NWO. The next night, a new Scott Steiner was born. Blonde hair, goatee, chainmail, sunglasses, and a brand new nickname, Big Papa Pump. Scott embraced his new persona fully, becoming one of WCW's most intimidating heels. He teamed with Buff Bagwell, feuded with Ric, and later took over leadership of NWO Hollywood. Over the next few years, he became a central figure in WCW, winning the US and TV titles, beating legends like Goldberg and DDP, and eventually capturing the WCW World Heavyweight Championship in late 2000. When WCW closed in 2001, Scott didn't rush to WWE. Instead, he wrote out his contract, then re-emerged in WWA, cheating his way to their world title. He even returned to Japan in 2002 for NJPW's 30th anniversary show, teaming with Ric one last time. After a long 8-year absence, Steiner made a thunderous return to WWE at Survivor Series 2002 in Madison Square Garden. The crowd erupted as he interrupted a promo by Matt Hardy and Christopher Nowinski, who were trash-talking New York City. Steiner stormed the ring and laid them out, instantly re-establishing himself as a fan favorite. From there, both Raw and SmackDown tried to sign him. Eric Bischoff and Stephanie McMahon each pulled out all the stops to recruit Big Papa Pump. But when Stephanie turned down his flirtatious advances, Steiner chose Raw. In early 2003, Steiner went straight for the top, targeting World Heavyweight Champion Triple H and his faction, Evolution. Their feud wasn't just about fighting, it turned into a clash of muscles and egos. By April, Steiner took part in a bizarre televised debate with Christopher Nowinski about the Iraq War. Afterward, his focus shifted. He teamed up with Test, with Stacy Keibler as their manager. But the partnership spiraled into chaos when Test began treating Keibler poorly. At Bad Blood, Steiner beat Tess to win her managerial services, only to lose her back weeks later. Their feud culminated at Unforgiven, where Steiner not only lost Stacy again, but also became Tess' unwilling servant. In a twist, Steiner turned heel and fully embraced the partnership, now treating Stacy as their reluctant assistant. Later that year at Survivor Series, Steiner joined Team Bischoff and scored a big win over Team Austin, though he was the first man eliminated. A few weeks later, Mick Foley fired both Steiner and Test, finally freeing Stacy. After a final failed title run at Armageddon, Steiner competed in his last WWE match at the 2004 Royal Rumble. He was released later that year due to injuries, including major foot surgery that left him sidelined for months. In 2005, Steiner returned to wrestling through independent circuits, often teaming with his brother Rick. Their UCW matches were billed as a nostalgic return, with wins against familiar opponents like Disco Inferno and Elvis Elliott. Then in 2006, Steiner showed up in TNA at Destination X, aligning with Jeff Jarrett and acting as his enforcer. He quickly became a menacing presence, feuding with top stars like Sting, Samoa Joe, and Christian Cage. After several high-profile losses, Steiner reunited with Rick for a dream match against Team 3D at Slammiversary, which got postponed due to a throat injury. He later returned and beat Team 3D in a brutal 2 out of 3 tables match at Bound for Glory. In 2008, Steiner won the infamous Feast or Fired briefcase match, cutting his now legendary Steiner Math promo in the lead-up to a title match against Samoa Joe. Though he lost, it became one of his most unforgettable moments. He later joined the Main Event Mafia, feuded with Petey Williams, captured tag gold with Booker T, and finally clashed with Bobby Lashley before quietly departing TNA in early 2010. After leaving TNA, Scott Steiner kept his wrestling career alive, moving to the Puerto Rican promotion World Wrestling Council in March 2010. He made his debut by attacking the reigning Universal Heavyweight Champion, Rey Gonzalez, making an immediate impact. A month later at Camino a la Gloria 2010, Steiner faced Gonzalez for the title. It wasn't his night as he lost the championship match, but he bounced back in a rematch, defeating Gonzalez on April 24th to claim the Universal Heavyweight Championship. But his reign was short-lived. On May 29th, he was stripped of the title after a controversial no-contest finish against Gonzalez. Steiner's journey took him back to TNA in January 2011, where he made an unexpected return as a face. He came to the aid of Kurt Angle, Matt Morgan, and Crimson, fending off the forces of Fortune and Immortal. The following week, Fortune made a shocking move, turning on Immortal and aligning with Steiner, Angle, and Crimson, creating an intriguing new faction. At Against All Odds in February, Steiner, along with James Storm and Robert Roode, defeated Immortals Rob Terry, Gunner, and Murphy in a 6-man tag match. Steiner was the one who pinned Gunner after delivering his signature Frankensteiner. Steiner's next feud was with Rob Terry, who attacked him during a pose-down segment. The rivalry heated up, and on the next Impact, Steiner got his revenge by defeating Terry in a singles match. He then formed a tag team with Crimson, and the two picked up wins, including a victory over Inc. Inc. at Lockdown. However, they lost a 4-way tag team match to Inc. Inc. in the #1 contenders match. But things turned when Steiner turned heel attacking Matt Morgan after they both expressed interest in winning the TNA World Heavyweight Championship. Their backstage brawl set the stage for a heated feud, which continued with Steiner costing Morgan his match with Jeff Jarrett. At Slammiversary 9, Steiner and Morgan clashed one-on-one, with Morgan emerging victorious to end their bitter rivalry. In June 2011, Scott Steiner joined Immortal on Impact Wrestling, further cementing his place in the faction. At Hardcore Justice in August, Steiner, Abyss, and Gunner lost to Fortune in a six-man tag match. A few months later at Turning Point, Steiner teamed with Bully Ray, but lost to Mr. Anderson and Abyss in another tag bout. After a period of inactivity, Steiner was released from TNA in March 2012. However, he quickly stayed active in wrestling. In 2010, he won the Canadian Wrestling International Heavyweight Championship by defeating Brutus Beefcake and defended it against stars like Kevin Nash and Big Van Vader. He also toured Europe, claiming the Dutch Pro Wrestling Heavyweight Championship in 2013. In 2015, Steiner appeared at Citi Field's Legends of Wrestling event, where he had a match with Rob Van Dam. Afterward, he and Doc Gallows attacked RVD, leading to Bill Goldberg's intervention. In 2017, Steiner returned to Impact Wrestling, briefly teaming with Josh Matthews. By 2018, he teamed with Eli Drake to win the Impact World Tag Team Championships, but lost them soon after. Steiner's final match in Impact was in 2019, where he teamed with Petey Williams and Jordan Grace. Later that year, he joined the NWA, challenging Aaron Stevens for the national championship. And that wraps up today's video. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you're always up to date with the latest content.
Give it up for the feet, baby.
All right, glad he's been on the treadmill.
Howard Finkel's death was truly tragic, especially because it came from a rare brain disease that slowly affected his health. For so many fans, he wasn't just the ring announcer. He was the voice of WWE. He added something special to every match, helping the moments feel a little more exciting and memorable. A lot of people fell in love with wrestling because of the excitement he added. His style was one of a kind, and when he spoke, people listened. Losing him wasn't just sad, it felt like the end of an era. When WWE first announced Howard Finkel's passing, they didn't immediately mention a cause, but it didn't take long for the details to come out. It was later reported that Finkel had been struggling with his health for some time, having suffered a stroke back in February 2019. Bruce Pritchard even talked about it on his podcast, mentioning that Finkel had been living in an assisted living facility before his death. Along with the stroke, some reports also linked his passing to complications from a rare form of brain disease. It's truly sad to think about what he went through in his final years, especially given how he was treated during that time. One of the most upsetting moments came when Finkel returned to WWE after a period of absence, and his weight gain became the subject of mockery. Michael Cole, a WWE commentator, made an offhand comment on air during Survivor Series 2011, saying he was glad he's been on the treadmill, a remark many fans felt was disrespectful to Finkel, a man who had been with WWE for decades and was considered a legend. It was disheartening to see someone who had done so much for the company treated like that, especially given the health challenges he was facing. Unfortunately, this wasn't the only time Finkel faced such treatment. There's also an incident from 2001 that, while details are a bit unclear, is still a tough chapter in his story. During a session of what's known as Wrestler's Court, Finkel was allegedly bullied and absolutely humiliated by his peers. For those who aren't familiar, Wrestler's Court was an informal, locker room style of justice where wrestlers would hold mock trials for perceived offenses among their colleagues. It wasn't always fair, and the consequences could be brutal. The exact reasons why Finkel was called to the court are not widely known, but it's clear that the experience was a low point for him. Imagine being a long-standing WWE legend, having spent years helping build the company, only to be humiliated in front of your colleagues in a makeshift court. This treatment, especially in light of his health struggles, shows just how hard things became for Finkel toward the end of his career. Despite all of this, he never lost his professionalism, and even in tough moments, he remained an essential part of WWE's history. And today, let's take a moment to appreciate the great moments that made Finkel's journey so unique. And what better way to do that than by looking back at his remarkable career? His love for wrestling wasn't just about being a fan. He truly wanted to be part of the show. And that dream took a major step forward on January 17, 1977, when he officially made his debut as a ring announcer at none other than Madison Square Garden. That moment wasn't just a personal milestone, it was the beginning of something big for both Finkel and WWE. By 1979, it was clear that Howard was more than just another voice. He became the lead ring announcer for the Worldwide Wrestling Federation's biggest events. When people heard his voice, they paid attention. He had a natural ability to get the crowd excited, and it didn't take long for him to become a key part of the entire WWE experience. Then on April 1st, 1980, something historic happened. Howard Finkel officially became the first ever WWE employee. That moment cemented his place in company history. Over time, he would go on to become WWE's longest-serving employee, a record that speaks volumes about his loyalty and contribution. What really set Finkel apart wasn't just how long he was around, it was the way he made every moment feel important. His voice wasn't just something you heard during matches, it was part of the identity of the company. You could hear that voice in the opening sequences of WWE's television shows, instantly giving the show a sense of importance and excitement. And of course, no one could announce a new champion like Howard. His signature call, emphasizing the word new when a title changed hands, always got the crowd to erupt. It became one of those small things that fans look forward to. He had a way of making the moment feel even bigger than it already was. In 1984, he officially became the lead ring announcer for WWF's television tapings, taking over from Joe McHugh. That role put him in front of even more fans, week after week, and only strengthened his connection to the audience. But Howard wasn't just someone who stood in the ring and read names. Behind the scenes, he contributed in many different ways. In a 2011 interview, he mentioned how his deep knowledge of wrestling history helped him contribute to the company's creative and talent relations departments, especially during the early days of the WWF. He was more than a voice. He was a resource and a trusted part of the team. His dedication was celebrated over the years. On January 19, 1987, Gene Okerlund presented Finkel with a plaque to honor his 10 years of announcing at Madison Square Garden. It was a small but meaningful recognition of his impact on the company and its fans. And Finkel, always a good sport, wasn't afraid to have some fun with his role either. At WrestleMania 9 in 1993, which had a Roman theme, he leaned into the gimmick and was introduced as Fincus Maximus, wearing a toga and all. It was silly, sure, but it showed how committed he was to the show and how he was always willing to play along for the entertainment of the fans. But not every moment was smooth sailing. During the May 10, 1993 episode of Monday Night Raw, a brawl between Shawn Michaels and Curt Hennig spilled outside the Manhattan Center, and in the chaos, Finkel's car got damaged. It was an example of how wild the WWE environment could be. Even the ring announcer couldn't escape the madness sometimes. Then in 1995, Finkel stepped away from ring, announcing on pay-per-views and television for about 7 months. During that time, Manny Garcia took over his spot. But Howard wasn't gone for good. He made a full-time return at the Royal Rumble in 1996, picking up right where he left off. In 1999, Finkel found himself in a rare on-screen rivalry, this time with fellow announcer Tony Schimmel. It wasn't the kind of feud that involved punches and steel chairs, but it was entertaining in its own way. And it showed that Finkel was game for just about anything the company threw his way. As the 2000s rolled in, Finkel began taking on a lighter schedule, with Lillian Garcia now handling ring announcing duties on Raw and Tony Schimmel working on SmackDown. Howard shifted more into a background role. Still, he continued to lend his voice to special events and house shows, and more importantly, he was the man who introduced the WWE Hall of Fame inductees at WrestleMania. It was a fitting role for someone who had seen so much history unfold from just a few feet away. Then in 2009, Finkel got the honor he truly deserved. He was inducted into the WWE Hall of Fame. The man who had introduced so many legends finally got his own moment. Gene Okerlund, a longtime friend and colleague, had the privilege of inducting him. But because Finkel was now part of the Hall of Fame class that year, it was Justin Roberts who introduced the group at WrestleMania 25. Finkel's appearances on television became less frequent after that, but they still mattered. He popped up during major pay-per-views and for the occasional special segment on Raw or SmackDown. No matter how rare the appearances became, every time fans heard that familiar voice, it brought back memories. He wasn't just an announcer, he was the voice of their childhoods, their favorite matches, and some of the most unforgettable moments in wrestling history. One of the most remarkable things about Finkel is that he appeared at every WrestleMania from the very first one in 1985 all the way through to 2016. That streak alone says so much about his place in the company. He was there during WWE's biggest moments, watching legends rise and fall, championships change hands, and history being made, all while playing his own important role in it. Then came a fun and refreshing chapter in Finkel's journey, one that showed just how much range and relevance he still had, even after decades in the business. While his classic role as the iconic voice of the ring had defined his early years, Finkel continued to adapt and remain a valuable part of WWE in new and creative ways. One of those exciting steps forward came when he lent his legendary voice to the intro for The Dirt Sheet, a WWE.com video series hosted by The Miz and John Morrison. It was playful, offbeat, and different from the usual action-packed content fans were used to seeing on TV. Yet hearing Finkel's voice kick off the show gave it a sense of flair and importance, like it mattered. Around this time, he also began doing more behind-the-scenes work, including conducting interviews for WWE.com and serving in an essential role that many fans may not have even known about: WWE's chief statistician. He wasn't just keeping records, he was the one making sure the numbers behind the matches, the titles, and the legacies were all in order. He cared about the history because he had lived through most of it. Finkel also made some memorable on-screen appearances during this later period. One particularly fun moment came on September 7th, 2009, during a special episode of Raw hosted by TV legend Bob Barker. The night had a Price is Right theme, and of course it was only fitting to have Finkel involved in announcing the playful segments. That same year, on October 2nd, he appeared in the background during WWE's Decade of SmackDown celebration. Another moment that reminded fans just how long he'd been part of the company's biggest milestones. Then came a wonderful throwback moment that had longtime fans smiling from ear to ear. On November 15th, 2010, Finkel stepped back into the ring announcer's role for a special, old-school episode of Raw. Even though it was just for one night, hearing his voice boom through the arena felt like stepping into a time machine. It was a powerful reminder of just how timeless his presence was. Finkel also popped up in a fun challenge segment on NXT called Outthink the Fink, where he quizzed competitors on WWE trivia. It was the perfect setup for him. His knowledge of wrestling history was unmatched, and it gave fans a chance to appreciate just how deep his roots went in the business. And in an interview on March 28, 2011, he revealed something that longtime fans probably already guessed. His proudest moment was getting to announce at WrestleMania 3. That night, over 93,000 fans packed into the Pontiac Silverdome, and Finkel had the honor of being the voice that kicked off that historic evening. To him, that was the peak. The memory of standing in front of that crowd, hearing the roar, and being part of something that huge, that's what stayed with him. Later that year, on November 20th, 2011, Finkel returned to Madison Square Garden, the place where his WWE journey had started decades earlier. He was the special ring announcer for CM Punk in his WWE Championship match against Alberto Del Rio at Survivor Series. For Finkel, it was more than just another assignment. It was a full-circle moment, announcing once again in the very arena that had launched his career so many years before. His guest appearances kept coming, and each one was a little celebration in itself. On April 13th, 2012, he appeared during the Blast from the Past episode of SmackDown, bringing back the nostalgia yet again. A few months later, on July 23rd, 2012, he was the special ring announcer on the 1000th episode of Raw, a milestone episode that felt incomplete without him. By 2014, Finkel took on a more playful role as part of the cast of Legends House, a WWE Network reality show where legends of the ring lived together under one roof. It was a fun change of pace and gave fans a more personal look at the man behind the iconic voice. He also worked behind the scenes as the off-camera announcer for The Edge and Christian Show, another WWE Network comedy series. And for a while, he was a regular on the JBL and Cole Show, a web series that blended humor and wrestling in a way that resonated with modern fans. That show ran until mid-2015, and Finkel's presence added just the right dose of classic charm. Eventually, his beloved role of announcing Hall of Fame inductees at WrestleMania was passed down to other ring announcers beginning in 2017. It was a small passing of the torch, but by then, Howard had already etched his name into the event's legacy. On January 22, 2018, during WWE's 25th anniversary episode of Monday Night Raw, Finkel was chosen to introduce none other than The Undertaker. He couldn't attend in person due to health issues, but WWE made sure his voice was still part of the show. They played a recorded introduction, and just like that, his presence was felt. Even when he couldn't be there physically, his voice was still strong enough to make a moment unforgettable. In the final years of his life, Finkel stepped back from the spotlight and worked more in a backstage role for WWE. He didn't need the camera to know he was still making a difference. And even after his passing, his voice found one last home inside the WWE ring. On June 14, 2020, at the Backlash pay-per-view, WWE honored his memory in a touching way. A recording of Howard Finkel introducing both Edge and Randy Orton was played to kick off what was billed as the greatest wrestling match ever. All right, that wraps up today's video. If you enjoyed it, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We'll catch you next time. See
My NXT rookie is Daniel Bryan.
Daniel Bryan? You gotta be kidding me!
You haven't been in the WWE for a minute.
How are you going to become a star in the WWE?
I'm not gonna leave this ring until I get what I want, which is a match with Triple H at WrestleMania. Hunter.
WWE has always been known as the land of giants. The bigger you are, the better your chances of making it to the top. For years, the guys who headlined WrestleMania or held the biggest titles were huge, tall, jacked, and larger than life. That's just how it worked. But then a man decided to change the narrative. His name is Daniel Bryan. He didn't look like a typical WWE star. He wasn't a muscle-bound powerhouse. He didn't really fit the mold. But somehow, he became one of the most popular and successful wrestlers of this generation. This is the story of how Daniel Bryan, a guy way smaller than most of his opponents, became a world champion. To really get how crazy this is, just look at the size difference. WWE officially said Daniel Bryan was 5 feet 10 inches and 210 pounds. But most sources put him closer to 5 feet 7 inches. And trust me, you can totally see him being 5 feet 7. He's too small for his own good. So when you see him standing across the ring from someone like Kane, Big Show, or Mark Henry, guys who were 7 feet tall and over 300 pounds, it looks like a mismatch. And honestly, it was. But that was the magic of it. Bryan wasn't supposed to win, but he did, over and over again. And fans loved it. Because deep down, we like cheering for the guy who isn't supposed to make it. The one who fights harder, digs deeper, and proves everyone wrong. Let's start from the start, shall we? Bryan Danielson was born on May 22, 1981, in Aberdeen, Washington, in a small, working-class town most people have probably never heard of. If you watched WWE between 2010 and 2021, you knew him as Daniel Bryan, the guy who would later become the most technical wrestler of the 21st century. Now, Bryan didn't grow up chasing fame or anything like that. His mom was a therapist, his dad was a lumberjack, and the family moved around a bit when he was young, living in Utah and Oregon before settling back in Aberdeen. Little by little, he grew and one day became a college student who knew exactly what he wanted to do: become a wrestler. While most kids were thinking about college or part-time jobs, Bryan was thinking about wrestling rings and training schools. At first, he had his eyes set on Dean Malenko's wrestling school down in Florida. That was the plan. But by the time he graduated in 1999, the school had shut down. So just like that, his first option was gone. Luckily, a friend gave him another idea. "Hey champ, why not check out the Texas Wrestling Academy?" And so he did. It was run by Shawn Michaels, one of the biggest names in wrestling, and Rudy Gonzalez. And Bryan went for it. That's where things really started. He trained hard, and by December 1999, he had his first official match. It wasn't long before he was traveling all the way to Japan to wrestle for a promotion called Frontier Martial Arts Wrestling. He went with Lance Cade, one of his training partners, and together they wrestled in a bunch of tag team matches. Not bad for someone just starting out. Bryan started out wrestling on smaller independent shows. He was so good that the World Wrestling Federation noticed him back when it was still called the WWF. They liked what they saw and signed him to a developmental deal. That meant they officially brought him on board, but sent him to Memphis Championship Wrestling to keep training. While he was in MCW, he worked with William Regal, who became a huge mentor for him. Bryan really admired Regal's skills and the way he carried himself as a pro. Around this time, Bryan also began calling himself the American Dragon. He won a couple of championships in MCW, the light heavyweight title and the tag team title. But then, in 2001, the WWF ended its deal with MCW and let Bryan go. This was a tough blow, especially because he was actually close to making the main WWF roster. In his book, he mentioned that they were talking about putting him in the Royal Rumble and using him in a new cruiserweight division. Unfortunately, that never happened. But then, the Ring of Honor happened and he became a big name in the industry. From the beginning, Bryan's journey wasn't just about taking on bigger guys. He also had to deal with company rules that could change overnight, backstage politics, and health issues that sometimes put his whole career at risk. But he never gave up. Fans loved how real he was. He didn't act like he was better than anyone. He just wrestled with everything he had and connected with people in a way that felt honest. There was something special about him, and people noticed. In 2010, Bryan got his first real shot on WWE's main roster through the original version of NXT. Back then, NXT was more of a reality show than a wrestling brand. Bryan was the respected underdog who kept losing. At first, it looked like things weren't going well, but a couple of storylines started to turn things around. He had a rivalry with commentator Michael Cole, who kept trashing him. Then there was The Miz, his mentor, who didn't take him seriously at all. But even with all that, fans started to see the truth. Bryan was really good in the ring, and he had this quiet determination that made him different. Then came a wild moment no one expected. On the June 7th, 2010 episode of Raw, John Cena was wrestling CM Punk. Out of nowhere, the 8 NXT rookies from Season 1 ran out and attacked everyone. Wade Barrett led them. They tore up the ring, beat up wrestlers and announcers, and even went after the camera crew. It was total chaos. This group would later be called the Nexus. The idea was to show that these rookies were hungry and ready to shake things up. Bryan jumped right into it. He went after ring announcer Justin Roberts, pulled off his tie and choked him with it. According to Roberts, that part wasn't planned. Bryan was just going all in, trying to make the moment feel real like Vince McMahon wanted. When it was all over, people backstage were shocked. Vince apparently loved how intense it looked, but that good vibe disappeared almost immediately. Within a few days, news broke that WWE had let Bryan go. When Bryan Danielson got fired from WWE in 2010, a lot of fans were shocked. It seemed like he was just getting started. He had only recently made his big debut on national television as part of a new group called the Nexus. It was supposed to be a big deal, but after just one episode, he was gone. The reason behind his firing had to do with a moment during that debut where things got a little too real. As part of the storyline, Bryan and the rest of Nexus were told to make their attack look intense and chaotic. Bryan, being the kind of guy who wants to give fans something that feels real, went all in. He grabbed ring announcer Justin Roberts by the tie and looked like he was choking him with it. He also spat on the floor near John Cena's face during the beatdown. WWE, trying to stay family-friendly, felt that he went too far, and just like that, he was let go. It didn't seem fair. Bryan was just doing what he thought he was supposed to do, make the moment look real and intense. He wasn't trying to hurt anyone or break rules. He just took his role seriously. But WWE decided to cut ties with him anyway, and it left a lot of fans upset and confused. Bryan didn't sit around feeling sorry for himself. He did what he had always. He was still just as good in the ring as ever, and fans followed him wherever he went. Interestingly, he didn't go back to Ring of Honor, which is where he had really become a star before joining WWE. That was a little surprising to people who had followed his career. It made some wonder if maybe Bryan was hoping that WWE would bring him back sooner rather than later. Maybe he thought this whole thing would blow over, and he might have been right. While Bryan was out doing his thing, fans were furious. Online message boards, wrestling websites, and social media were filled with people venting about how unfair it was that Bryan got fired. Some even wrongly blamed Justin Roberts, the ring announcer, thinking it was his fault. It wasn't, of course, but the internet can get wild when people are upset. What made this situation really different, though, was how loud the fans got. It wasn't just people tweeting or posting online. Fans actually started chanting Bryan's name, Daniel Bryan, during WWE shows, even though he wasn't there anymore. This wasn't just a few people here and there. It was loud. It happened on live TV. WWE couldn't pretend it wasn't happening. That kind of fan support is rare. WWE usually decides who they want to push, and that's who gets the spotlight. But in Bryan's case, the fans were pushing back. They were basically telling WWE, "You made a mistake, and we're not going to forget it." Eventually, WWE listened. Less than 10 weeks after firing him, just 65 days, Bryan was back. And they didn't just bring him back quietly. They brought him back on a big stage at SummerSlam 2010. Team WWE was going up against the Nexus Group, and they needed one last member for their team. Right before the match, it was revealed that the final teammate was none other than Daniel Bryan. The crowd exploded. You could feel the energy in the arena shift the second he walked out. In the storyline, WWE explained that Nexus had kicked Bryan out because he showed remorse for his actions. That made it easy to turn him into a good guy. He was no longer part of the bad group. He was someone who had a conscience and wanted to do the right thing. Fans bought into it right away. They were just happy to see him again. After SummerSlam, WWE gave Bryan a feud with The Miz, who at the time was loud, arrogant, and a perfect bad guy for Bryan to go up against. Not long after, Bryan beat Miz and won the United States Championship. That was his first title in WWE, and it meant a lot. Not just to him, but to the fans who had stood by him through all the drama. Around that time, it also came out that John Cena had gone to bat for Bryan behind the scenes. Cena reportedly told WWE management that they had made a mistake and that Bryan deserved another chance. Having someone like Cena in your corner carries a lot of weight in WWE, and that probably helped get the ball rolling. In the end, the firing turned out to be a blessing in disguise. It separated Bryan from the Nexus storyline, which eventually lost steam, and it gave him a unique connection with the fans. He wasn't just another wrestler on the roster, he was their guy. Someone who had been treated unfairly, fought back, and earned his way back in. From that point on, Bryan's career started building slowly and steadily. He kept putting on great matches and earning respect. In 2011, he won the Money in the Bank ladder match on SmackDown, which gave him a guaranteed shot at the World Heavyweight Championship. Later that year in December, he cashed it in and won the title from Big Show at the TLC pay-per-view. For a moment, it felt like everything was going right. But then came WrestleMania 28 in 2012. Bryan walked in as champion, ready to defend his title against Sheamus. But the match didn't go the way anyone expected. The bell rang, Bryan turned to kiss his manager AJ Lee, turned back around, and boom! Sheamus hit him with a kick and pinned him in 18 seconds. Just like that, the match was over. Fans couldn't believe it. It felt like WWE didn't take Bryan seriously and they were mad. Instead of turning away, though, fans got louder. They started chanting "yes" during shows. This was something Bryan had started doing as a heel, kind of a bragging, over-the-top celebration. He'd point his fingers in the air and shout "yes, yes, yes" after wins. It was meant to be annoying, but fans flipped it and turned it into something positive. It became a rallying cry. Yes wasn't just about winning anymore. It was about standing up for Bryan, showing support, and demanding that WWE give him more. The chant took on a life of its own. It showed up in other people's matches, in crowd chants, and eventually even outside of wrestling. It was everywhere. As Bryan's popularity continued to grow, WWE paired him with Kane in a comedy tag team. At first, it seemed like a joke. They were complete opposites. Bryan was intense and fiery. Kane was this big, scary monster. The two were put in anger management therapy as part of a goofy storyline. But somehow, it worked. The team, called Team Hell No, became a hit. Fans loved it. Bryan showed he could be funny and relatable, not just a great wrestler. They even won the tag team titles and held them for a good while. By 2013, it was clear that Bryan was one of the most popular wrestlers in the company. WWE gave him a shot at the WWE Championship against John Cena at SummerSlam, and he won clean. But then, right after the match, Triple H turned on him. He attacked Bryan, and Randy Orton cashed in his Money in the Bank briefcase to steal the title. WWE used this moment to launch a long-term storyline where Triple H and Stephanie McMahon, playing the role of the Authority, said Bryan wasn't good enough to be the face of the company. They called him a B-plus player, someone who was good, but not great. Not good enough to be the guy. It hit hard because it reflected what some people actually believed behind the scenes. But fans didn't agree. They wanted Bryan. They believed in him. Every time WWE tried to push someone else, the crowd would chant, "Daniel Bryan," or "Yes." It got to the point where WWE couldn't ignore it anymore. The final straw came when Batista returned and won the Royal Rumble. WWE wanted him to headline WrestleMania, but the fans weren't having it. They booed him non-stop. They even started calling him Bootista. It was clear WWE had to change course. Eventually, Bryan got his match at WrestleMania 30. He faced Triple H in the opening match, with the stipulation that if he won, he'd be added to the main event. He won that first match, and later that night, he beat Randy Orton and Batista to win the WWE World Heavyweight Championship. The crowd exploded. It was the ending fans had waited for. After all the ups and downs, Bryan stood tall, with thousands of people chanting "Yes" in unison. Bryan had worked so hard for years and finally reached the top. It was emotional and exciting, and fans were so happy for him. But not long after that special night, things started to go wrong. Bryan had a serious pain in his neck. It turned out that he needed surgery. Because of that, he had to step away from the ring. Even worse, he had to give up the championship he had just won. That moment that was supposed to be the best time of his life quickly turned into a hard and painful time. He went from celebrating to being out of action in just a few weeks. He spent several months recovering. Fans kept hoping he'd be back soon, and finally, at the end of 2014, he returned to WWE. He came back strong and entered the 2015 Royal Rumble match. Everyone was excited. People thought this would be his big comeback. But during the match, he got eliminated earlier than expected. The crowd was disappointed. They wanted him to win. They wanted to see him back on top. Bryan didn't give up, though. He focused on a new goal. He went after the Intercontinental Championship. At WrestleMania 31, he won it in a tough ladder match. It felt like things were turning around again. But then, it happened again. Not long after that match, Bryan was pulled from action. At first, people didn't know why. Later, it came out that there were new injury concerns. This time, it wasn't his neck. It had to do with concussions. He had to give up another title, and this time the situation felt more serious. Over time, more details came out. Bryan started talking about what was really going on. He admitted that he had suffered a lot of concussions during his career. Not just a few, a lot. He said he had 3 concussions in just the first few months of wrestling. WWE doctors had counted at least 10 in total. But Bryan said the real number was probably higher. It was hard to know exactly how many. Back then, people didn't talk much about concussions, and a lot of wrestlers just kept going, even if they weren't feeling right. Then Bryan shared something even more worrying. He had been having seizures. He also said his last seizure was back in 2012. Even though it had been a few years, the fact that he hid this for so long made things complicated. When WWE found out about the seizures and the history of concussions, they got really careful. They wanted to protect Bryan, but they also didn't know if they could trust everything he said, since he had kept those things secret for so long. They started doing more tests. One of the tests was an EEG, which looks at brain activity. The results showed some unusual things, so they kept looking. Then doctors in New York found something important. They discovered a small lesion on Bryan's brain. It was in a part of the brain that's connected to things like movement and speech and emotions. It's also an area that's linked with seizures. That made everything more serious. WWE doctors didn't feel comfortable letting him wrestle again. Even if Bryan felt fine, they had to think about what could happen if something went wrong in the ring. So Bryan waited. He met with different doctors. He did more tests. He read about brain health and tried to learn as much as he could. He still believed he could wrestle again. Some of the doctors he met said he was healthy enough to return. That gave him hope. But WWE's doctors still wouldn't clear him. They wanted to be absolutely sure it was safe. And they weren't sure. In early 2016, after almost a year of waiting with no clear answer, Bryan made a big decision. He announced that he was retiring from wrestling. On an episode of Monday Night Raw, he came out to the ring and told everyone that he had to stop wrestling. It was one of the hardest things he ever had to do. He cried. The fans cried. It was emotional and heartbreaking. Bryan talked about how grateful he was for everything. He talked about the fans and the memories and how lucky he felt. But you could tell he wasn't ready to walk away. He still loved wrestling. He just didn't have a choice. Even after Daniel Bryan announced his retirement from wrestling, he didn't walk away from WWE. He loved wrestling too much to just disappear. So in 2016, WWE gave him a new role. He became the general manager of SmackDown, which meant he was still part of the show, still on TV, but he wasn't wrestling. He was there to help make matches and guide the stories. Fans still got to see him every week, and that helped a little. But deep down, Bryan still wanted to wrestle. It wasn't a secret either. He talked about it often. In interviews and even on the reality show Total Bellas, which he appeared on with his wife Brie Bella and her sister Nikki, he shared how hard it was to be done with wrestling. He said it straight out. He missed it badly. He wasn't pretending to be okay. He told the truth. Retirement was tough. Even though he had a new job and a growing family, a big piece of him still felt missing. Wrestling wasn't just a career for him. It was something he loved, something that gave his life meaning. And letting go of that wasn't easy. But Bryan didn't just sit around being sad. He didn't accept retirement as the end. Not completely. In fact, he started to work on a plan. He wanted to come back, and he was willing to fight for it. Not in the ring at first, but in the doctor's offices. He went all over the country, meeting with experts. Not just one or two, but many. Neurologists, neurosurgeons, concussion specialists, anyone who might be able to help him figure out if he could safely wrestle again. He also tried new treatments. One of them was called hyperbaric oxygen therapy. It involved breathing pure oxygen in a special room or chamber, and it's something that some athletes use to help with recovery and brain healing. Bryan said that if any of these treatments gave him bad signs, or if doctors warned him to stop, he would listen. But that didn't happen. The signs weren't bad. In fact, he started to feel hopeful. This went on for about 2 years. 2 full years of testing, treatments, and meeting doctor after doctor. He wasn't doing this quietly either. Fans knew he still wanted to return. He said so in interviews. People started wondering, could he actually make a comeback? Then in March 2018, something amazing happened. WWE made an announcement that shocked a lot of people. Daniel Bryan had been medically cleared to return to wrestling. After everything he'd been through, he was finally allowed to compete in the ring again. And this wasn't just some quick decision. It wasn't done for a storyline or just because fans wanted it. This clearance came after a serious, very careful process. WWE didn't just rely on their own doctors this time. They brought in outside experts, people who had no connection to WWE, just top-level doctors in the field of brain health. There were 3 main specialists involved: Dr. Robert Cantu, Dr. Javier Cardenas, and Dr. Jeffrey Kutcher. All 3 were respected experts in brain injuries and neurological health. They were either chosen or approved by WWE to do the evaluations. After they all gave Bryan the green light, WWE's own medical director, Dr. Joseph Maroon, also agreed and officially cleared him. Dr. Cantu in particular was a big name. He works with professional sports leagues like the NFL, NBA, and NHL. He's a leader in studying concussions and brain injuries. On February 26, 2018, he looked over all of Bryan's medical records. He did new exams, reviewed Bryan's history, and really took his time to make sure nothing was missed. After all of that, Dr. Cantu shared what he found. He said Bryan wasn't showing any symptoms. His brain tests were normal. His EEG, which looks at brain waves, also came back normal. And his MRI, the scan that shows what the brain looks like, showed no clear signs of past brain injury at that time. That part surprised people the most. It didn't mean Bryan never had concussions. It just meant that, at that point, his brain looked okay. Dr. Cantu said that based on everything he saw, there was no strong reason to stop Bryan from wrestling again. In medical terms, there was no absolute contraindication, which basically means there was nothing clearly dangerous that said he couldn't. WWE didn't rush into it. They took his past health problems seriously, especially the seizures he had kept secret years before. That's why the process had to be so detailed. It wasn't just about Bryan's feelings or the fans wanting him back. It was about making sure it was safe. No one really knows exactly what changed. Maybe Bryan's brain healed more than anyone expected. Maybe newer tests gave better answers than older ones. Maybe doctors just understood more in 2018 than they did in 2015. Whatever the reason, the result was the same. Daniel Bryan was back. So at WrestleMania, in April of that year, he stepped into the ring again. He teamed up with Shane McMahon in a match against Kevin Owens and Sami Zayn. The crowd went wild. People were just happy to see Bryan doing what he loved again. And of course, he and Shane won the match. It felt like a big celebration. But after that return, things got a little shaky. His next feud wasn't great. WWE put him in a story with Big Cass, who was a lot taller than Bryan, and the whole thing leaned heavily on that size difference. Some of it was awkward and just didn't land well with fans. There was even a segment where a little person dressed like Bryan came out to mock him. A lot of people thought it was in poor taste. It just didn't feel like the right way to use someone like Bryan, especially after such an emotional comeback. So Bryan needed something different. And later that year, he found it. He completely changed his character. In November 2018, on an episode of SmackDown, Bryan shocked everyone. During a match with AJ Styles, he turned heel. That means he became a bad guy again. He hit Styles with a low blow and beat him to win the WWE Championship. Just like that, we had a whole new Daniel Bryan. But this wasn't just a normal heel turn. Bryan reinvented himself. He dropped the yes chant. He said the yes movement was dead. He started calling himself the planet's champion. And instead of being the humble underdog that everyone loved, he became this angry, preachy, eco-friendly character who looked down on everyone else. He started calling out fans for hurting the environment, wasting things, buying too much, and basically ruining the planet. He was using real issues that he actually cared about in real life, but twisting them in a way that made people boo him. It was clever. It was different. And somehow, it worked. He even got a new championship belt made out of hemp and wood instead of leather and metal. It looked totally different from the usual title belts. People didn't know what to make of it at first, but it fit perfectly with the character he was playing. Bryan later said that he had a lot of fun with this version of himself. He called it the new Daniel Bryan and said it gave him a chance to take the guilt he felt about his own lifestyle and throw it onto everyone else. He was surprised WWE even let him go as far as he did. He joked about how he was basically calling out Vince McMahon's generation and the company's culture right there on live TV. Eventually, though, WWE did ask him to tone it down a bit. Some people felt the environmental stuff was getting too political, which probably meant it was hitting a little too close to home. But whether people loved it or hated it, the planet's champion version of Bryan gave us one of the most memorable storylines in recent years. In early 2019, a wrestler named Kofi Kingston started to get a lot of attention. Kofi had been with WWE for more than 10 years, mostly in tag teams or mid-card matches. But after a great performance in a gauntlet match, fans suddenly rallied behind him. They wanted him to get a shot at the WWE Championship. And that's where Bryan came in. As the champion and the heel, Bryan became the perfect opponent for Kofi. He was now the face of the system, the guy trying to hold Kofi back. It was kind of funny because a few years earlier, Bryan was Kofi. He was the underdog that the fans believed in. Now he was the one standing in the way. This storyline became something really special. People called it Kofi Mania. Fans were loud, passionate, and fully behind Kofi, and Bryan played his role perfectly. He made Kofi look even more like the hero. The big match came at WrestleMania 35, and it did not disappoint. Kofi beat Bryan in an emotional, hard-fought match. The crowd went nuts. It was Kofi's first world title win, and it meant a lot. Bryan later said that helping Kofi get that moment was one of the best things he ever did in WWE. That says a lot about who Bryan is, not just as a performer, but as a person. He used his own status and his own history to help someone else shine. After losing the title, Bryan stayed active. He had a run as tag team champion with Rowan, and after a while, he turned face again. That means he went back to being a good guy. He had more matches, more stories, and stayed a key part of SmackDown. Then in 2021, he got into a big feud with Roman Reigns. Roman was the Universal Champion and was in the middle of one of the best runs of his career. Bryan challenged him a few times, at Elimination Chamber, at Fastlane, and finally at WrestleMania 37. That match also included Edge, who had won the Royal Rumble. It was a triple threat match, and it was wild. All three guys gave it everything. Reigns ended up winning, but Bryan proved again that he could still deliver incredible matches, even after everything he'd been through. Not long after that, Bryan had one last match in WWE. It happened on SmackDown on April 30th, 2021. He challenged Roman Reigns again, but this time there was a catch. If Bryan lost, he would be banned from SmackDown. He gave it his all, but Roman won. And just like that, Bryan was gone from WWE TV. A few weeks later, in May 2021, his contract officially ended. He didn't re-sign. That was it. Daniel Bryan's time in WWE was over, at least for now. It was the end of a run that lasted more than a decade, not counting his few years away due to retirement. When Daniel Bryan's WWE contract ran out in May 2021, he didn't sign a new one. He wasn't fired. There was no big argument or drama. He just felt like it was time to try something new. After being in WWE for so many years, and after everything he had gone through, he wanted a change. He talked about it later and said he wasn't angry with anyone. He just wanted something different, something that felt more exciting and fresh. One big reason was a new wrestling company called AEW, All Elite Wrestling. Bryan said he liked what AEW was doing. They focused more on wrestling, not just entertainment. WWE was more about the big stories, the show, the bright lights, and trying to reach a bigger, more casual crowd. But AEW felt more like wrestling first. That's what drew him in. He said AEW reminded him why he fell in love with wrestling in the first place. That made a lot of sense if you followed Bryan's career. Even before WWE, he wasn't dreaming about fame or being in huge arenas. His real dream was to wrestle in Japan, where wrestling is treated like a serious sport. That was always his style. His matches were all about technique, skill, and storytelling in the ring. That's how he made a name for himself. Not because he was flashy, but because he was really, really good. He even said that during his last big match in WWE, at WrestleMania 37, he felt kind of disconnected. He said he didn't feel much while it was happening, like he wasn't fully there. That was a sign to him. When you're in one of the biggest matches of the year and it doesn't feel special, something's off. So even though WWE had offered him a safe, long-term deal, maybe even a job for life, he turned it down. He wanted something that made him feel excited again. He wanted to face new people and wrestle in a place that fit what he believed in. So in September 2021, he made his debut in AEW. He used his real name, Bryan Danielson, and walked out during a big pay-per-view called All Out. The crowd went crazy. He walked right up to Kenny Omega, who was the AEW champion at the time. It was a big moment and people were hyped to see what would happen next. After that, Bryan explained more about why he joined AEW. He thanked AEW's owner, Tony Khan, for building a company that gave wrestlers more freedom and gave fans something different to watch. Bryan said he believed that if you just focused on good wrestling, people would show up. You didn't have to copy what the other company was doing. You didn't need to make things flashy or over the top. Just give people great matches and they'll care. And that's exactly what Bryan did. He had some of the best matches of his life in AEW. He wrestled a whole new group of people, and each match felt like a big deal. He went back to the kind of wrestling he did before WWE. Hard-hitting, technical, smart. Fans loved it. Other wrestlers respected it, and Bryan looked happy doing it. He also became a leader in AEW, not just in the ring, but behind the scenes too. Younger wrestlers looked up to him. He had been through so much in his career, and now he was helping others grow while still putting on top-tier matches himself. Even though he was busy, Bryan started talking about slowing down. He said he planned to wrestle less after 2024 so he could spend more time with his family. But as of late 2024, he was still going strong. He wrestled part-time, but every time he did, it mattered. He still gave it everything. That move to AEW showed everyone what was most important to him: wrestling itself. Not the fame, not the money, not the spotlight, just the craft. When you think about Daniel Bryan's whole career, it's pretty amazing what he's done. He wasn't the biggest guy. He didn't have the typical look of a WWE star. But none of that mattered. He was one of the best wrestlers ever because of his skill and how he told stories in the ring. He had moves like the yes lock and cattle mutilation that showed how smart and technical he was. And when he kicked or elbowed someone, you believed it. He brought intensity and heart into every match. He also had something else: a deep understanding of how to make a match feel real. He could fight someone way bigger than him and still make it believable. He would focus on their legs, twist their arms, or use quick moves to outsmart them. He made people care. He could make a crowd go silent with tension or explode with cheers. That's not something you can teach. It's something special. And he helped change wrestling in a big way. When he rose to the top in WWE, it wasn't because the company pushed him. It was because the fans demanded it. People saw something real in him. They believed in him. That's how the Yes movement started. It wasn't a storyline at first. It was a fan movement. And it worked. He became WWE champion at WrestleMania 30, and it felt like a win for everyone who ever felt like the underdog. That moment showed WWE and the whole wrestling world that you didn't have to be the biggest or loudest to be the best. You just had to be great at what you did and connect with people. And after that, you started seeing more wrestlers who didn't fit the big guy mold getting big chances. People like AJ Styles, Finn Balor, and Seth Rollins. Bryan helped open that door. People in the business respect him a lot. William Regal, who helped train him, has always said Bryan was special from the start. Regal said Bryan worked harder than anyone, never played games backstage, and always stayed true to himself. John Cena, who wrestled Bryan many times and is even part of his family now, said Bryan deserved everything he got. Cena said Bryan was either being a great dad, a great husband, or getting healthier every single day. That's who he is. Even when Bryan and Cena were on opposite sides on TV, you could tell there was real respect between them. And Bryan wasn't afraid to speak honestly, even in character. He once told Cena, "You're not a wrestler," which made their story even more real. They had very different styles, but they made it work. That's what made their matches so good. A lot of people call Daniel Bryan one of the best to ever do it. Not just because of the titles he won, but because of how he did it. He never lost who he was. He cared about the fans. He cared about the art of wrestling. And he never took shortcuts. He proved that the little guy could make it. That hard work, passion, and being yourself were enough. And that might be his biggest legacy. So yeah, Daniel Bryan's journey in WWE was anything but easy. He wasn't the biggest guy. He didn't have the usual look. And at times it felt like the system was working against him. But none of that stopped him. He just kept showing up, doing the work, and proving people wrong. That's what made him different. That's why fans connected with him. He wasn't supposed to be the face of the company. He was called a B-plus player, told he didn't belong at the top, but he didn't let that define him. He turned every setback into motivation. Whether it was getting fired, losing in 18 seconds, or having to give up his title due to injury, he never let any of it break him. And that's the real story here. Daniel Bryan didn't just succeed in a land of giants. He beat the odds, changed the game, and made history on his own terms. He showed everyone that heart, skill, and connection with the crowd matter more than size. He became a world champion, not because WWE picked him, but because the fans demanded it. That's rare, that's powerful, and that's why his story still inspires people today. If you like this video, hit that like button and make sure to subscribe for more stories like this one. Got a favorite Daniel Bryan moment? Drop it in the comments. I'd love to hear what stuck with you the most. And if you want more underdog stories from wrestling history, let me know who we should cover next. Thanks for watching. The smallest WWE wrestler destroyed everyone. Until next time, keep saying yes, 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 and keep rooting for the ones who never stop fighting.